Good morning, everyone. I might just get started because I know this is a breakfast assembly. So I will it'll take about an hour and a half, and then you can get off to work. My name's Lish Faya, and I'm your MC for this morning. And welcome to the WorkSafe ACT's breakfast series. These have been hugely popular, and I think both it is the breakfast, but it's also the topics, such important topics, and what a great way of gathering you all before the day starts to hear from experts in the field. Now, my first duty before we get started is to warmly welcome someone I look forward to getting up to hear from, Auntie Violet Sheridan, for our Welcome to Country. Violet, she's nattering over there. Yeah, are you? Please give a warm welcome to Auntie Violet.
Thank you. I'm half asleep, but I hope I don't go to sleep. I've got to go to university graduation after this. 2 of them. Yesterday I was at it and it was 289 graduates. So it's my pleasure, but before I go into my welcome, I'd like to acknowledge Jacqui, Agius, Work Health and Safety Commissioner and Labour I Licence Commission, but also I'd like to acknowledge Mick Gentleman, Minister for Industrial Relations and Workplace Safety. So welcome all again to the breakfast. I'd like to pay my respects to my elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people here this morning. But I'd also like to acknowledge the non-Indigenous people in the room. In keeping in the general spirit of friendship and reconciliation, it gives me great pleasure once again to welcome you to the land of the Ngunnawal people. And I wish you all a successful day, safe day, and enjoy your breakfast. Thank you.
No, Auntie Violet always the busiest woman I know, and I don't know what time you get up, Auntie Violet. 5 o'clock, you see. She's remarkable and always gives us a very warm welcome to country. Thank you, Auntie Violet. Now, these breakfasts have been a huge success, and we focus on a different part of work health and safety for each breakfast. And today we're looking in particular at vulnerable workers. Now, vulnerable workers, new workers, workers from cold backgrounds, non-English speaking backgrounds, workers who are returning to work after a long period of time, changing careers. The diversity of the workforce is huge, and so how we can ensure that the workplace safety is upheld for those vulnerable workers. In the last session we did, it was for hospitality and retail, and it was really interesting. At the end of the session, we have a chance for questions and answers from our panellists. And one worker stood up and highlighted really emotively her experience as a vulnerable worker and not being able to speak up for risk of losing her job, but so aware of the workplace risks. So I think it really highlighted to me how hard it is to adhere to workplace safety or to call it out for those vulnerable workers. So that's why we're here today. Now, just to let you know, we are recording this event for future use. So if you aren't comfortable with being recorded, please let one of the Work Health ACT Workplace and Safety, WorkSafe ACT folk know, and we will make sure that you are not included. And you may hear graphic descriptions of injuries and other potential upsetting or triggering content. Again, please just look after your own mental health and seek support if necessary. Now, this is a breakfast. They don't call it an industry breakfast for nothing. And at the moment, you are also very well behaved. There's not a single scraping of plates, but breakfast will soon arrive. And do not hold back. Eat everything, and if there's a few spare spaces beside you, eat theirs as well. So I'm just saying that this is breakfast, and we don't expect you to sit quietly and wait for you to to eat. Now, to kick off this morning, we've got some wonderful speakers with a wealth of experience. Of course, Jacqui Agius, the Work Health and Safety Commissioner here in the ACT, and the Labour Hire Licence Commissioner, who hosts today's breakfast. She brings her experience in this industry and will focus on the vulnerable workers. Mari Boland, who is the CEO of Safe Work Australia, who has worked across the industry across Australia, and Aaron Guilfoyle, who's a practice leader with WHS Regulatory and Prosecutions from the legal side. So to kick it off, I'd like to start with Jacqui Agius. Please give her a big round of applause this morning.
Welcome everyone. WorkSafe events are inclusive, safe and respectful. If you need assistance during this morning's breakfast, please see one of the WorkSafe ACT staff members. In fact, there's a nice table of them right there, all smiling away and up nice and early. And yeah, that's a great smile and wave there from Kat. And for those of you who don't know Kat is our young worker education officer. Kat was initially a teacher and has come to us, and we're really glad to have Kat. She gets out speaking to not only just schools and education areas, but also to a lot of young workers and apprentices. I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people and their elders, and I proudly acknowledge the continuing connection they have to the land and community. I also acknowledge any other people and families with connection to the lands of the ACT and our regions, and I extend my acknowledgements to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. Thank you all for coming, and I acknowledge Minister Gentleman and also the CEO of Safe Work Australia, Mari Boland, and Aaron Guilfoyle, the principal solicitor, and I'll get it wrong, Aaron, it's too early for me. Mari and I were just saying this is our worst time of the day, early in the morning, and but breakfasts are great because it means that you can go to work afterwards. But you'll hear from both Mari and Aaron in a little while, and they bring their expertise here today, and I thank them for coming. If you haven't already met Lish, you'll know that she's full of energy, and we love having her here at our breakfast because if you're not feeling it yet, by the time you leave, you'll feel it, because Lish is like an energy zapper, and she just spreads this amazing energy throughout the room, and as always, it's great to have you with us, Lish. Thank you also to Alice and Frank for all of your work in putting together this morning. Our workforce in Canberra is as diverse as the city itself, and everyone has a right to a safe and healthy workplace. Inclusion starts with respect, creating an environment where everyone feels valued and accepted will encourage a healthy and safe workplace. When we prioritise inclusion, we inspire growth both personally and professionally. Ultimately, respecting each individual's uniqueness builds trust, forming the foundation for collaboration, achievement and ideas. Together, all of us can create a workplace where everyone thrives, and that must be our aim. Some people are probably thinking, what's this, what does it mean? What does vulnerable workers mean? And they are workers who have greater exposure than most to injury and illness due to various factors such as age, gender, disability, I beg your pardon, I'm really thirsty. I just probably need a glass of water if that's all right. Oh, there they are. Thank you. So sorry, I should have had some before I get up. Oh, thank you. And socio-economic status or culture. The term vulnerable worker is not legislated. Although maybe it's something that we need to think about. When I was doing a bit of research for today, I could find lots of things about young workers, and Aaron and I were having this discussion earlier. And we are starting to see a trend both in prosecutions and data collection when it comes to young workers, but we need to do a lot better in relation to collecting data when it comes to other vulnerable workers. The term vulnerable worker is an umbrella term, and we use it to address workers which our data and intelligence tell us are at a higher risk of work-related illness or injury because of who they are or because of a particular personal attribute. And they include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers, young workers, migrant workers, culturally and linguistically diverse workers, new starters or people re-entering the workforce or changing careers, LGBTQIA+ workers, workers living with disability, labour hire workers and workers over 60. And vulnerable workers are at a higher risk for a number of reasons, and it includes lack of experience or training, language barriers, lack of confidence, precarious employment conditions, because when people are in precarious employment conditions, they're less likely to be able to speak up about safety issues. If a person has limited access to safety information, inadequate accommodations such as for workers with disabilities, and of course the fear of reporting unsafe practices due to job insecurity. That's just a massive one. I've got a little bit of data. If you're coming to these breakfasts, you know that we'll put some data together. The data that I'm going to focus on are emerging trends and patterns in relation to young workers, and I am going to focus on young workers just for this bit. Because age is consistently recorded in all workers' compensation claims, we have a robust data set, and considering young workers make up 39% of the employed population in the ACT, it gives us quite a significant data set when it comes to those workers. In the financial year 23 to 24, there were 519 accepted workers' comp claims for young workers under the age of 24. This is a 12% increase in accepted claims compared to the previous year. And that's really disappointing for me to see as the regulator, that in fact, rather than reducing, oh my gosh, rather than Alice is holding up her 2-minute sign, be prepared you two, given that we're seeing increases rather than the number reducing is really, really concerning for us. The top industry with these claims is the construction industry, with about 27% of all young worker claims. The jobs with the greatest number of claims are labourers, carpenters and joiners, and electricians. And after construction, the most claims for young workers are in retail trade, accommodation, food services and healthcare. Male young workers were 12 times more likely than female young workers to make a workers' comp claim in the construction industry, whereas on the other hand, female young workers working in the professional, scientific and technical services industries are worth 3 times more likely to make a workers' compensation claim than their male counterparts. This kind of analysis helps us better understand the challenges faced by different worker groups, and it also informs us at WorkSafe on where we target our resources when it comes to vulnerable workers. So if you're a vulnerable worker and you're in the room, and I hope you are in the room today, there are lots of things that you can do. Firstly, understand your rights, because that's crucial not just for vulnerable workers but for all workers. Without this knowledge, it's challenging to know if you're properly being protected. One of the things that I was actually online last night looking in at the New South Wales WorkSafe website, and they've got some wonderful resources that are on safety which are translated into a variety of languages. And so as a worker, if you are a vulnerable worker, you do have a right under the Work Health and Safety Act to refuse to work if you reasonably believe that things are unsafe. That applies to all workers. If you are going to exercise that clause, I suggest that you do it, that you speak to someone first, and you can speak to either your HSR in the workplace, or if you have a representative outside of the workplace, such as a union representative, you can speak with them as well. Of course, we know that, and because most of the people in the room I can see are safety experts, we know that we must take reasonably practicable steps to eliminate or minimise the risks, including some really key things like maintaining a safe work environment, safely managing machinery, implementing safe systems of work, providing adequate training and supervision, ensuring that all of the facilities are accessible. I've spoken to some vulnerable workers who have told me some stories, and it made me think of something that happened to me when I was in Year 5 at high school. And I remember my Year 5 teacher didn't very much like me because I came from a background that was culturally and linguistically diverse. My family are Maltese. And I'm going to use a word that may be offensive, but I'm using it about myself because it is what my 5th grade teacher used to say to me. My 5th grade teacher used to say to me, hey, you wog, get to the back of the line, and don't stand near the wog because you'll get wog germs. And I think about that because it really impacted on me in my life. And I think about that in relation to vulnerable workers and some of the things that we say to people that we work with, that we don't realise the enormous impact that it has on them. And I have spoken to some people who are non-binary, and one of the things that they've said to me is, people always make mistakes when it comes to pronouns, and it takes a little bit of time to get it right. But what offends them most is when somebody continually calls them he or she when they're a they or a them, and they make no effort to change, or they don't apologise for using the wrong pronoun. Because it's going to take us a bit of time to get used to using right pronouns. And I have a non-binary child, so I know that sometimes I do refer to them as a specific gender, and I always apologise. But you're probably thinking, why is she telling that story? I'm telling you that story because it's so important to respect other people and to think about how something may impact on them. For instance, if you yell at a person who is a person with an intellectual disability for doing something wrong when they don't understand or we haven't explained to them properly that they're doing something wrong, then we're going to negatively impact on that person and potentially result in them not coming back to work. My time's up. I'm going to end, and you'll have time to ask questions a little bit later. Just by saying that vulnerable workers face a higher risk of occupational incidents and ill health, and they need extra support. And really, at a really high level, a few key issues to focus on include comprehensive induction training, encourage open reporting, and ensure that there is effective and adequate supervision. That's so important. At WorkSafe, we publish a whole range of things. Please get onto our website and have a look what's on there. Have a look at some of the other regulator websites. They've got some amazing things on as well. And because some of them are bigger, they are able to do a lot more than us. But there are some great resources around, also produced by Safe Work Australia, and encourage you to get onto their website as well. But I look forward to some of your questions, which no doubt will be challenging, and looking forward to the other speakers as well. Thank you.
We do allow for some breakfast early morning. Thank you so much, Jacqui. And as Jacqui highlighted, we'll have some time for questions. So please fire anything at our guests this morning, because this is the chance to ask all of those, whether you are in the vulnerable worker category or an employer. Our next guest brings it all together as the CEO of Safe Work Australia. Murray Boland is a member of the Respect at Work Council and the G20 Occupational Safety and Health Expert Network, an observer on the heads of workplace safety authorities and the heads of workers' compensation authorities. She's conducted the 2018 National Review of the Model Work Health and Safety Laws and the conduct of work health and safety prosecutions in the ACT. That's to say, she's the full bottle on all of this, not just for the ACT, but workplace and safety laws across Australia. Murray, thanks for your time this morning.
I just noticed I'm in the same suit as the photo, but I do have other clothes. Good morning, everyone. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Thanks, Jacqui, I acknowledge Minister Gentleman as well in the audience as well. So thanks, Jacqui, for the invitation to attend the breakfast, and it's great to share the stage with you and Aaron this morning. As you know, Safe Work Australia is responsible for developing the national work health and safety policies and strategies, collecting and reporting national data, and undertaking research to improve work health and safety and workers' compensation arrangements in Australia. We also develop and maintain the model work health and safety laws with the aim of harmonising work health and safety regulation across Australia. So last week we published the key national work health and safety statistics for 2023. So that's the number of workplace fatalities and workers' compensation claims for serious injuries. So I had another look at that data over the weekend with a view to sharing with you some of the key headline statistics, which I think are relevant to our topic, and perhaps provide a sobering context for our discussion this morning. So in 2023, workers aged 65 and over had the highest fatality rate at 3.9 fatalities per 100,000 workers. There was a 19.2% increase in workers' compensation claims for mental health conditions since 2021-22, and a whopping 97.3% increase compared to 10 years ago. And it's hidden, I think, as Jacqui alluded to as well, it's hidden within these mental health injury statistics that we would find the psychological injuries due to workplace sexual harassment and assault, occupational violence, gender-based violence, impacts of bullying, racism, and discrimination. And we also must remember that not everyone makes a workers' compensation claim, so there's likely to be also significant underreporting of injury and illness. And significantly, it's the healthcare and social assistance industry that had the highest number of serious workers' compensation claims in 2023. And we know that this is an industry with a substantial number of culturally and linguistically diverse workers, First Nations workers, women, and young workers. So, as Jacqui said, we know that some groups of workers are more likely to encounter certain work health and safety risks, or are more likely to experience harm from these risks. And I'll use the term vulnerable workers to broadly capture these groups. So we can't assume that all workers are the same, and there are a range of reasons some groups of workers may be more vulnerable. For example, because of limited experience, power imbalances, communication barriers, because they're exposed to higher or different risks, or because control measures aren't effective for them. So in work health and safety, we often talk about a systems approach, and this means we change our systems at an organisational level to eliminate or minimise the risk. A systems approach means you don't need to individually identify which of your workers fall into a vulnerable group. And importantly, nor do they need to identify themselves as vulnerable. You minimise the risk for everyone. And I'll be continuously emphasising this morning the importance of focusing on how the organisation as a whole manages its work health and safety system to ensure it's creating a safe working environment for all workers, including vulnerable workers. So whatever the industry, one of the strengths of the work health and safety laws is that they acknowledge the value of a worker's experience of their job in assisting to identify and control work health and safety risks. Businesses and employers need to use a range of different sources of information to identify hazards, from observing work, looking at workplace records and data, and using public information. For example, the Australian Human Rights Commission's 2022 Time for Respect report found 40% of workers in retail had been sexually harassed in the preceding 5 years. So if you're a business in retail, this is clearly a reasonably foreseeable hazard. But it is your workers who will be able to tell you what tasks or aspects of the work put them at risk, how often they're exposed to these hazards, how severe they are, and how those aspects of work could be changed to protect them. So I have an anecdote here. I took it out, but I've been told I can go over 5 minutes and put the anecdote back in. So my anecdote is that I'm currently chairing a roundtable on occupational violence in the retail industry. And one of the key messages coming back from workers is a lack of support for them when they follow the shop's product return policies. So the frontline worker is usually a young person, and they tell the customer, no, you can't return the product for whatever reason, and I can see people here nodding who've probably done that. So they're following the policy, they've been told to follow the policy. The customer gets aggressive, asks for the manager, and the manager comes in, says yes to keep the peace, and that's left with the worker feeling unsupported and undervalued. So this is a wicked problem, we know, but it's interesting that that was the first big key issue that's come through this round table. And so that led to the discussion, and I Googled this a bit as well, and it seems to be something that's emerging of kind of challenging that broader organisational narrative about the customer always being right. As I say, it's a wicked problem, but during that discussion, there was a real acknowledgement that many workers in retail are young and that this is their first introduction to the workplace, and they won't necessarily have the confidence to speak up, and I think that just echoes some of the issues Jacqui has raised. So that hesitancy among vulnerable workers, it's really important to recognise that. And as I said before, that will be for a whole range of reasons: power imbalances, the risk of discrimination and stigma sometimes attached to raising work health and safety issues. And for LGBTIQA plus workers and other vulnerable worker groups in particular, there are likely to be more barriers. For consultation to be effective, we need to empower our workers to participate, for example, by focusing consultation on the hazards, not the individual, and using health and safety representatives, and also facilitating anonymous and confidential contributions. So I feel very strongly that it's critical when we're discussing vulnerable workers that we shift the focus from the individual worker to that broader organisational culture. And this shift, I think, has been enabled by the introduction of the psychosocial regulations into the work health and safety legal framework. Historically and in practice, work health and safety had been primarily focused on eliminating risks to workers' health and safety from physical hazards. This is despite the fact that when the model work health and safety laws were developed, health was defined as psychological as well as physical health. But despite psychosocial hazards being covered by work health and safety laws, these risks and the harm arising from them were usually treated as workplace relations or discrimination issues and left to the Human Resources Department. This past approach was generally reactive and led to a focus on the individuals involved and their specific behaviours, rather than on the need to take a systematic approach to prevention at an organisational level. And I had a good example of how the focus on an individual worker masked the broader organisational issues a couple of years ago, when I assisted a young man who was being essentially managed out of his workplace on the back of him raising a bullying and racism complaint against a supervisor. So this complaint had been filtered through Human Resources Department as a grievance, so through the grievance processes, as most are still, I think. But in unpicking that situation, it became clear that the root of the problem was the lack of a consistent, fair and transparent shift allocation and rostering system. So because there was no rostering system, the supervisor had been enabled to basically look after his mates, and in terms of allocating overtime, etc. And so this led to resentments, isolation of many workers, and the creation of significant psychosocial risks at the workplace. As part of the review I did in 2018, I made a recommendation which was actioned in 2022 to amend the model work health and safety laws to include express provisions on the management of psychosocial risks in the workplace. So these regulations provide clarity, I think, now for employers, workers and their representatives about what exactly is required to meet the legal duty to prevent psychological injury at work. And there are significant areas of risk of psychological injury for vulnerable workers in particular. For example, we know that LGBTIQA plus workers are more likely to be exposed to hazards such as sexual and gender-based harassment, discrimination, and sexual and gendered violence. And I note that some LGBTIQA plus workers will have additional vulnerabilities that increase work health and safety risks, such as being a young or new worker, working alone, or being from a migrant or culturally and linguistically diverse background or a First Nations background. Safe Work Australia has now published 2 model codes of practice which address managing psychosocial risks at work and sexual and gender-based harassment. And these model codes address a broad range of harmful behaviours vulnerable workers may be exposed to. The model codes assist businesses and employers to apply the familiar risk management process to eliminate or minimise the risk in a systematic way. They encourage employers to move away from individual grievance processes and to do more than having a policy and training on inappropriate behaviour. For example, if you can identify there is a risk of sexual or gender-based harassment while performing certain tasks or in certain locations, you can redesign work and the work environment to eliminate or minimise the risk. So while I've been focusing on work health and safety and that broader organisational system approach, I don't want to discount the role of the Human Resources Department either. And the important thing, I think, is for both to work together. So, for example, you may need to work with human resources to consider the skills of your supervisors and provide additional information, training, instruction and supervision to control some risks. I think the rostering scenario I mentioned is a good example where there can be that crossover between work health and safety, human resources and indeed industrial relations. That's, you know, all of them needing to work together to create the safe environment and manage some of those potential risks. Policies and strategies must be well aligned, appropriately integrated. So, for example, human resource policies and approaches to recruitment, performance management, misconduct, promotion, accountability and support will all impact on how effectively we can manage psychosocial hazards at a workplace. So I'll stop there because I think I've well gone over my 5 minutes. I encourage you to take a look at the codes of practice because they really are the practical support and give the practical guidance on how to manage some of these scenarios and often complex situations. My main message, I guess, is move the focus away from the individual back to the organisation and look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mari. And just highlighting that systems approach, to me, stood out the difference or the importance of HR working with WHS, and it is complicated. And I must admit, having done a few of these breakfasts, what I'm learning is that it is complex and there is stigma attached and there shouldn't be stigma attached, and it's a hard conversation to have. There's so many different things to address. It's really opened my eyes, I guess, as an employee in the workplace of how important it is, not just the physical health, but for me the psychosocial health. And I wonder if all of you have heard over the last couple of years, as Murray was highlighting, that importance of the psychosocial as well as the physical. Now, Aaron Guilfoyle is our final speaker this morning. He's the practice leader of WHS, regulatory and prosecution. So he has a dual role, both advising businesses on WHS compliance and also advising and representing regulators in prosecutions that we've been hearing about this morning. So please give a warm welcome this morning to Aaron Guilfoyle.
Thanks very much for that introduction, and thanks to WorkSafe and the Commissioner for the invitation to speak about a really important subject this morning. I head WHS practice area at our firm MacDonnell's Law, practising across the country. I was Queensland's independent work health and safety prosecutor for 3 years before joining the firm, and I've seen firsthand the tragic outcomes if vulnerable workers, and in many cases young workers, and in fact young people at workplaces, at businesses, not necessarily workers, if they're not looked after. And I just want to take the 5 minutes, I'll do my best, Jacqui, 5 minutes to give you my thoughts with that experience and my background on really this thesis. This is the takeaway. Everybody's aware of the challenge to meet in this space. I don't think business is meeting it. When we look at the area I practice in, where it goes wrong when we're in courts, are we doing well enough? So, sure, we're doing something, but are we doing enough? Thesis really for this morning is we're probably not doing enough. So what are we talking about? There's our snapshot. Young workers and migrant workers, particularly where English is not their first language. And I want to look at really just the details of two case examples this morning. And in fact, one of them's just young people at a business, being looked after by a business where it goes tragically wrong. And I've bolded there the two factors which influence that tragic outcome in the case I'm going to mention, and you'll see why it's a case which sticks with me and will stick with me forever. And the more of, in our experience, the more of these factors you have interplaying, the greater the risks. And I want to finish off by talking about, what we think this particular challenge is. Mari said, there's great guidance in the codes of practice. Certainly, as a safety lawyer, me and my team always find that to be the case. I'm not sure that we need reminding, but if we do, it's in the Young Worker Code of Practice. That's Queensland's example, and you see there guidance, which, as I said, we should all know. Young people may leap and often leap into situations before thinking about their own safety in a way which people who are, to use the definition, over the age of 25 years simply don't. They need greater care for that reason and others, including the others in the 3 dot points at the top. Risk-taking behaviour and being influenced by their peers. Culturally and linguistically diverse and migrant workers, what we see in the case examples more often than not is the language barrier not being accommodated. And it's not that the steps aren't taken, particularly where there's a larger percentage of a non-English speaking workforce at a particular workplace. But I wonder and worry that sometimes it's a bit of window dressing. We see that theme coming through in case examples. So here is the first of the two that I want to mention this morning. Huckleberry is one defendant, the other is Minatoya. Much publicised work health and safety prosecution, quite simply 2 Japanese school students under the care of their school on a homestay trip to Australia are taken to Lake Mackenzie on K'gari, Fraser Island. 2 factors of those I've put up that played into this incident. 1, they're young, they're 16. 2, English was not their first language. They were given what was called a general safety briefing on the way there. It was given in English. Then one of them can't swim. They go down to the lake for about 8, 9, 10 metres. It's shallow, and you can see that by the colour of the water. Then it drops off at 30 to 35 degrees to about 9 to 10 metres. One of them gets into trouble. They go swimming, pulls down the other one. The teachers think that they've gone to swim across the lake or an excursion such that their bodies are not found until the next day. There was not even any panic about them being missing. Adults, can I suggest, wouldn't have ventured out to where the children did if they couldn't swim. They wouldn't have engaged in that risk-taking behaviour. And even if they spoke some English, they're not paying attention to what was probably an inadequate safety briefing anyway because of the language barrier. There was an attempt by counsel for one of those defendants to kind of say, well, here's the different roles that people played. There's all these businesses and our client really wasn't the most serious perpetrator here. And Magistrate Costanzo, in the decision in this matter, it bears reading, I think, said, there's just a distraction. You're all responsible, what we call multiple concurrent duty holders. This is quotes there is what was said by Mr Minatoya's counsel. They've really been the masters of their own demise. And we see more and more workers getting it wrong, particularly workers who are not vulnerable, and they're being prosecuted as well as a business because workers do have a responsibility to look after themselves and others. But young people at a workplace or young workers, you can see the response of the courts to a submission that they should have taken more care for their own safety. It's a fallacy. Apologies for the format here. But this here, classic, I won't dwell on the matter. It's not that old now. And what we see is a young person coming to Australia. He's come here to study. He's put on a job site as a bricklayer. He's there on his second or third day. There's a swims, but he doesn't sign on to it. Only the director of the business signed onto it. So again, it's window dressing. 30-kilometre-hour winds hit a block wall that he's performing labouring work to construct, falls over, and he suffers those very severe injuries you see in the third dot point. Defendant ultimately pleads guilty. You can see the seriousness with which the court viewed the offending behaviour here. What's material is on the next slide. Victim impact statement tendered by the prosecutor at the sentence. It detailed the hard work undertaken by Mr Singh and his family to bring him to Australia to study. He needed to supplement, as is often the case, his income. And this is only a 2021 decision. He's got no experience. He's put on in a high-risk workplace, and the directions given to him, can I suggest he's being taken advantage of as a vulnerable worker. The only training that he's given is how to hold and move bricks. And so he finds himself in harm's way, and you can see what I talk about, the interplay of factors. Somebody, lack of experience, lack of training, lack of English as a first language, and probably worried about speaking up because they've come as a temporary visitor to this country to better themselves. When I wanted to look at the scale of the problem, a statistician will probably criticise my thinking here, but I went to Queensland Prosecutor's website to get the most recent court outcomes there. They finalised 10 prosecutions in Queensland in July, so I looked at the last 2 months. They are the first three. The first three that are posted there are all young workers. That's why my thesis is more needs to be done. There should be none, let alone 1/3 of all matters prosecuted in the state of Queensland for the month of July this year involving serious injuries to young workers. When I provide a lot of what I do as a safety lawyer is advice to boards and leadership teams of big business about how to do better. And one of the things I say to them is, all of this stuff that you're doing as a big business, including engaging me, that's great. Hazard identification, trying to understand your workers, including vulnerable workers. That's all good. None of it matters if you don't focus on training, instruction, supervision. People don't do those things. What's the point? You end up with, you might as well not do all of the stuff at the start. One of the takeaways in this thesis of mine this morning, Do Better, is it's even harder when you have vulnerable workers. But we know what the risks are. We know them. They're not new. They're easily understood. Vigilance is required. Murray, you cited that statistic, 40+% sexual harassment reported retail sector. It really speaks to a very short anecdote of how wicked the problem is. Speaking with client works across retail, and they said, you know, we have young workers, often female, school-aged, in retail settings in large shopping centres. They're closing up, and you know, so they're alone. They're young. We know of the risk of sexual harassment. We're seeing reports of it. So what we've now, you know, one of the things we did is make sure there's a security guard from the centre there with them when they're closing up. All sounds good until we find out what? Security guard, sexual harassment. That's why this morning my message is vigilance. Let's all try to do better in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Training, instruction, supervision, and I just go back to my own early days working as a young person, you probably are all thinking of your experiences or your young people in your life's experiences. I'm just trying to train my daughter at the moment. I don't know if anyone... I've got a 14-year-old daughter and she's obsessed by this TikTok guy that slices cucumbers. Has anyone else discovered this? Honestly, that's why the price of cucumbers have gone up, because he's like got millions of views. And the thing that worries me is he uses a mandolin. When you were saying about the finger slicing, this is a mandolin, like so it's that sort of very sharp instrument. It's not a musical instrument. It's a sharp instrument that you slice the cucumber with. And I'm standing over there training, instructing, supervising. Doesn't listen. And every time can you please be careful, because so many people have sliced off their finger on that mandolin, and I wonder if the cucumber guy on TikTok is ever going to release a video of that. Okay, I do laugh every time we come here because it's the most fabulous catering, but the world's smallest cups, and so the tea bag takes up the entire space. But please enjoy, keep drinking, eating fruit platters and the works, because now it's your chance to ask questions of our fabulous panellists. If they've raised any questions or concerns, you want to explore something further, please just raise your hand. Alice is roaming around with the microphone. Auntie Viola's hot off the press. I might start with you. I'm going to kick one off, Auntie Violet, and then we'll come to you. What stood out to me when I was listening is that there's a common thread, a common denominator between everything all three of you are talking about, and that to me feels like supervision and support. And I wonder, Murray, if you can speak to that, and I wonder if that's what it takes is good supervision.
Yeah, look, that stood out to me as well. That was a common theme across our three talks, and for me, it kind of reinforced that the supervisor level is both the key area of risk, probably, but also the key area of solution. I mean, I know myself from managing organisations, was often at that kind of supervisor, middle management level that you would hear something and you would go, what? They did what? Or, so I think that's just, like I said, a key area of risk, but also of solution in terms of ensuring that, you're constantly talking to them, I guess, as well, around, the importance of all the things we've mentioned, of consulting with their staff, of respect. I think that was the other thing that came out from Jacqui's first introduction, that a lot of this, a lot of the risk around vulnerable workers and workers in general, it comes back to just treating people with kindness, decency and respect, and it's just kind of how we kind of rise above some of these petty things that happen in our workplace, but also, at a more systematic level, I think, that supervisor level in any organisation is critical to managing the risks. Yeah.
And is there any other common denominator you see working, Aaron?
Just a really short anecdote on that supervision point, I discussed with Mari in the break. It kind of demonstrates that, on one hand, I think it's a bit of a wicked problem, but I think when you look at what the competing factors or the relevant factors to be managed are, they're all pretty common sense, and it's really about being diligent to understand them, understand how they're playing together. The anecdote is in one of those three cases that I put up in the slide from Queensland. All those decisions are freely available online if you want to take a look. Young worker, 17-year-old in manufacturing, injures himself after, I think, day after he's shown how to use the plant, puts his hand in to clean it. Very severe injury, and we see that all the time in manufacturing, was being supervised by a worker who spoke very limited English. That was his supervisor. So you've got two people probably not going to be communicating very well, but risk-taking behaviour from the non-English speaking supervisor who was doing the same thing. Young worker follows supervisor, supervisor non-English speaking is the one charged with showing him how to do it and keeping him safe. And I suspect that's not too uncommon, a kind of mix, whether it's that way or the other way around in an industry like manufacturing. But if we work backwards from an incident like that, none of those things would be a surprise to us if we stopped to take the time to understand them and plan the work better, or particularly plan the supervision of that work better.
Where does it fall down then, Jacqui?
I think it falls down in so using your example, your example of the cucumbers, and I'll try and speak properly this time.
As a parent, I do understand there's a different power dynamic between an employee and a parent.
Much different. One of the most common injuries we see in kitchens with young people is actually cuts. And burns, so they're probably the two that we see mostly in the kitchen. And so it can be that the supervisor says to a young person, I'll just chop up those onions and then I'll come back in a minute. Whereas when you described how you were supervising your child, you were there and you were watching. And so the thing about supervising is you must actually actively supervise. You can't ask someone to do something and walk away, particularly if it's the first time that they're undertaking an activity like chopping an onion. I mean, that sounds like something very simple when you ask someone to chop an onion, but you don't know whether that person has ever chopped an onion before. Maybe they don't realise how sharp the knife is. Maybe they haven't been taught to keep their fingers, the way their fingers need to be when they cut. You see how chefs cut. So it's really about not giving proper direct instruction and not actively supervising.
I've got more questions, but I want to open it up to the floor. Auntie Violet, I know you had a question, and please ask. Can I just ask my follow-up question?
My question is vulnerable workers that can't speak English properly and they're put in the front line, so you get irate customers that trying to explain what they want. I'd like a salad sandwich. Now, they're putting these also young workers at the front that can't understand English properly, and you're trying to tell them, or the customer's trying to tell them what they want and they don't understand. So the customer attacks these young workers, and the workers, but just also going to MacDonnell's as well, is that the company that employs these young workers must understand that these young workers, or workers themselves, adult workers, can't understand or speak English properly, but they put them at the forefront to be attacked.
Yeah, it comes back to work design. I think Mari and probably Aaron both mentioned that. How do we design our workplace in a way that doesn't put people at risk? So putting a vulnerable, culturally and linguistically diverse person at the front of house is actually putting them in the direct line of risk. And so as an employer, what you should be considering is whether that's the